headliner game that we've been looking forward to for a while. Number 17 Alabama against number 5 Georgia. Georgia's a 3-point favorite. I think it's fair to say we've been looking forward to this one since the last one ended. You know, it's always must-see TV. I know there are people maybe nationally that are sick of these teams playing, but the over-under I have is 2.5 reminders that these teams haven't played in Athens in 10 years. It's wild. I don't think the average college football fan realizes that. It is truly bizarre that the scheduling gods, all of which want Alabama to do really well, according to Georgia fans that you'll talk to. It's wild that the scheduling gods have given us this much Alabama, Georgia, and so little football of them in Athens. None of their last 7 meetings have been in Athens. 4 in Atlanta, 2 in Tuscaloosa, 1 in Indianapolis. That's right. These teams have played in Indiana more recently than they have played in Athens. I was there. It was electric. It was absolutely awesome. This should be plenty electric as well. It's going to be a fantastic atmosphere, a blackout, which is an odd choice by Georgia, given the history of a certain 2008 blackout in Athens that did indeed turn into a funeral, as Scott Cochran predicted. Don't know that the vibes there totally connect, but no matter what color is most prevalent for Georgia, this is going to be an extremely hostile atmosphere for Alabama, an Alabama team that has not exactly handled extremely hostile atmospheres very well under Kalen DeBoer. Before I get to some historical numbers here, just know this, that if you're betting on this game, bet responsibly. If you are picking a winner, you want to sound smart talking to your friends, whatever side you land on, just know that whatever side wins, you're going to end up feeling dumb for thinking one thing mattered more than the other, okay? Because a lot of things you could point to and say, why'd you assume that wasn't going to win out? Or why'd you assume that? This is why we're explaining all this, okay?
Yeah, and it feels like every one of these matchups has kind of felt this way, where it's like, a couple of them in a row, it's like, how could you ever doubt Alabama or Saban? But there's always that reason. It's like Saban is no longer here. It is now DeBoer, but it's at home for Alabama. And so it's the classic like truth serum game where, to your point, in 2-3 weeks, we're going to look back and say, duh, that was the result, no matter what the result was. Even if it was like a blowout win for Georgia, it's like, well, yeah, this was going to happen. Very similar to Texas, Georgia last year. It's like, yeah, when you think about it in retrospect, I guess that did make a lot of sense, even if it didn't ahead of the game, right?
We'll just get on the Sunday pod and we'll talk like we could have seen this coming a mile away. This was obvious, Will. We're so dumb. We're so dumb. Mm-hmm. Maybe it matters that Alabama is 2-5 away from Tuscaloosa under Kalen DeBoer. Maybe it matters that Georgia hasn't lost a home night game since 2009, the Barack Obama administration. Maybe it matters that Kirby Smart
is 1-6. Obama too. That was still hope and change level. We didn't even have any of the second. Yeah,
this is true. Yeah, Kirby Smart technically coached in the Barack Obama administration. Yeah, because 2016, first part of it. Yeah. Maybe it matters that Kirby Smart is 1-6 against Alabama and 107-13 against everyone else. Maybe it matters that Kalen DeBoer is 6-1 against AP top 10 teams. Maybe it matters that Kirby Smart hasn't lost any game in Sanford Stadium in the 2020s. Maybe it matters that Kalen DeBoer is 2-0 in his only true road games against AP top 10 teams in his career. Maybe it matters that these two teams played in a game last year that felt like they were entirely different teams from half to half. I don't know. I do know that we will play the results based on what happens with these teams. I also know this spread is only 3 points because the biggest mismatch in this game favors Alabama. At least on paper, it does. And maybe we'll look at the results and say, why did we assume that Georgia wasn't going to be able to figure out its issues in the secondary? But Alabama's receivers against Georgia's secondary feels like the area that the Tide have to exploit, much like we saw last year when Ryan Williams went nuclear. That feels like the plan you have to run back if you're Kalen DeBoer taking advantage of those matchups.
There is something about a Georgia DB, and I don't know what it is, but they just look particularly, appetizing at a defensive highlight. I don't know why. Maybe it's how proper they look in kind of the white uniforms, but you look back at those highlights, it's like, wow, this is rough. Like the way that, honestly, that game meant so much more for Alabama last year than it did for Georgia, because look at how it mythologized Ryan Williams, right? And you talked about how down the stretch, he wasn't exactly the player that he was built up to be. But when you have, again, hard to, I know hyperbole is hard to do with Nick Saban, but to me, that was the most electric play of Bama that I think I've seen. When you think about Bama getting down, when you think about how like the stakes of that game and the actual individual play that was made by Ryan Williams at the point, like, the down distance, all that. But that being said, I think the key to this is your boy Jeremy Bernard, right? Because last year we talked about Alabama's not having that second receiver, and it's almost like that's the part that's progressed the most out of Alabama.
Was the Ryan Williams catch more electric than 2nd and 26? Probably not.
The result, that's the thing. The result of 2nd and 26 is a championship. You talk about the backup quarterback, but the actual play, the individual play, it just kept going. It was like a 2-minute highlight. Like there was like new Georgia guys spawning out of a portal and getting thrown into the ground. It was crazy.
It's probably the better play to rewatch a clip of on the internet. Yeah.
Like that was just honestly good reading of coverage, in the championship game. Whereas like that was like an individual, like that shouldn't have happened by Ryan Williams.
Fair. I think there were plenty of Georgia fans that felt fortunate to survive the Tennessee game with how much the secondary struggled. I think you can look at that and go, well, that should be corrected in the bye week. How much of that? I don't know. And how much of that is just who Georgia's going to be this year, especially in a post Malachi Starks world. Like that could be what it looks like a lot of times on the back end. And maybe they don't have the answers in the secondary. You do have Kirby Smart, the best person ideally that can figure those things out. I'm asking a lot of questions that I don't truly know the answers to. And that's not the best way to do a game breakdown, especially for a big game breakdown like this one. But look, I'm admitting to you, I don't know how much beating up on a Wisconsin team matters when that Wisconsin team a week later has fire fickle chance Phil Camp Randall after getting walloped by Maryland. Like, I don't know what type of workload to expect from Jam Miller in his first game of the season, even though Ty Simpson said that he practiced like a wild man. I don't know if the same will be true of Tim Keenan on that defensive line for Alabama. And all of a sudden, this Alabama is just going to have much more success against Georgia's run game compared to what they looked like against Florida State. I don't know that that's going to be the case. I don't even know if we will know in the final 2 minutes of this game who is going to win. I don't know all of these things, but I don't think Georgia walks off that field without a win. I think Georgia finds a way, Will. I think they do. It ain't pretty defensively for Georgia. They're still going to have moments in the secondary where they get gashed. But I think Georgia puts together a late drive to pull out a 30-28 thriller. And Gunnar Stockton, once again, does very Stetson Bennett the fifth. Yeah, that's Stetson Bennett the fifth, not the fourth. Stetson Bennett the fifth things down the stretch to join him in the I Beat Bama Club, which consists of one Kirby Smart era Georgia quarterback, Stetson Bennett.
Yes, I guess that's how the Stetson Bennett name, it's like there's a council, kind of like the Heisman House, and you have to be bestowed the name Stetson Bennett from killing a large deer or a lion or something, or beating Alabama.
Well, yeah, I was going to say the hunting thing, Gunnar Stockton would not have been able to get Stetson Bennett the fifth. That would have been Brock Vandegrift who would have been able to get that.
That's why they got to be a little bit more stringent. Now it's about beating Bama. True. Exactly. So talking about these Kirby Smart DBs, it's interesting because it feels like the time between these conversations has gotten shorter, right? Because I could go all the way back to, the SEC championship game against LSU where one Garrett Nussmeier comes in and kind of plays well in the second half. Not enough for it to matter, obviously. Georgia was obviously a way better team than LSU. But I remember the visuals of Kirby Smart screaming at his defensive backs and us going, this is kind of weird. Like, why is this happening? And then it doesn't matter. They kind of tighten up and obviously go on to win.
But they didn't tighten up immediately after that. Ohio State had their way with them, and CJ Stroud was masterful in that playoff game that obviously they needed a Stetson Bennett-like comeback to be able to survive what was a really tough day at the office for their secondary again.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's interesting about people in our profession is like, I don't want to overweigh a win or a result because at the end of the day, you're so right. Whereas those DBs didn't actually improve, therefore resulting in a win. It was that they kind of won in spite of that. That's a really good point. And so again, last year there were points where we're like, these Georgia DB, like, what is going on? Like Mississippi State was a good example. And then again, going into the Texas game, it's like, look at this offense, look at Steve Sarkisian, and then suddenly they tighten up and become, again, the Philadelphia Eagles, the 85 Bears out of nowhere. And so there are times when, again, you feel so ridiculous questioning, what is arguably the best, or at least one of the best defensive back coaches of our generation of all time, and Kirby Smart, who has developed all these people, not just at Georgia, but at Alabama, former defensive back for Georgia himself. It's like, you simpleton, this is the god of defensive backs. How could you ever question this when you see a result like the Texas games, when you see that like these great offenses are put in a locker by Georgia? But then these signs just keep showing their heads. Again, the Alabama game was an example last year of, like not great play in a matchup where Alabama looked so unstoppable. And then after that, their season really came off the rails because their offense never looked the same again. And so you could talk about maybe they, spent too much of their resource on one game and they showed too many good plays, whatever it would be. But that being said, there has to come a point where either Georgia adjusts and they are just consistently a great defense week in and week out that does not make mental lapses, penalties, blown coverages, or we have the right to keep asking these questions, especially with the progression of Alabama's receiver room. And again, we could talk about they lost to Florida State. That's very true. I get that. I don't think that we could make jokes about Mike Bobo, but he just had a masterclass, and Gus Malzahn certainly wasn't at the top of his game when he smoked Alabama. So I say all that to say, it really is about trends in these games, because I hate to say the same thing again, but it's like either way you feel kind of like you're vindicated, right? And so I will say I've picked Georgia in enough of these games to know what it's like to feel silly. But I feel like at some point, Kirby Smart has to get over this hump. I think that Gunnar Stockton showed enough against what is, I think, a pretty good Tennessee defense, right? And so I'll go ahead with you and pick Georgia here. But let me ask you this question. How do you feel like Gunnar Stockton is against the blitz this year?
I could look up those numbers for you in just a second. What I will say, and this speaks to this point. Let me get those numbers on PFF real quick. Both of these teams desperately want game records to emerge. They are searching for those answers right now. It was a question that we had about Alabama coming into this season. It's a question that is played out in the first part of this season. And they are searching for those guys. Like you talk about how Georgia was able to figure things out against Texas last year. One of the reasons that they figured that out was because they got their game records to step up in those moments. And you saw what it did for that secondary. Like they all of a sudden, they were teeing off. Like Jalen Walker in that Texas game last year, you're just like, who's blocking that guy? Because it ain't Kelvin Banks, an All-American left tackle. It ain't anybody on that decorated Texas offensive line. And both of these teams are searching for those guys because I do think they need help on the back end. Alabama's secondary came in a lot more decorated. Alabama was, I think PFF had Alabama as the number one secondary in college football coming into the season. And it's still really difficult to look that good if you don't have guys that pressure the quarterback. Let me be the first to say. So like there is that element of this that I think is really important. You wanted those numbers of Gunnar Stockton against the blitz. This year, when he has been blitzed, and by the way, he's been blitzed on 43% of his dropbacks, which is pretty high rate. I mean, that's almost 50-50.
That's a little bit of he can't shoot. You know what I'm saying? That's a little bit of we think this guy can't beat us against the blitz, which we saw against Tennessee. He could.
He's actually averaging 10.6 yards per attempt against the blitz, though, which is solid. Like that's really good. And that speaks to what we saw play out in that Tennessee game where he's taking some hits, man. He's taking some hits and delivering on-target throws. I think that's an early box that he's checked, is being able to handle that in ways that I don't know that he was checking that box at the end of last season, even when he was able to have the comeback against Texas in the SEC championship. And obviously the mostly rough day at the office against Notre Dame. When he's not been blitzed this year, Will, he's averaging 6.2 yards per attempt. Adjusted completion percentage of 78.3. But against the blitz, Gunnar Stockton this year is completing 89% of his passes. Adjusted completion percentage that factors in for the one drop that he's had in those situations.
So that's fascinating.
Pretty good.
And great job looking that up as quickly. I didn't mean to just drop that on you, but this is the stat here, right? Because to me that says, as a defensive coordinator, you don't really respect this guy, right? Because the great quarterbacks, the Bryce Youngs, the Joe Burrows, you're not going to send pressure on them.
Throw a lot at them.
They're going to see that hot read. They're going to see who's open immediately when they identify the mic. But a younger guy like Gunnar Stockton who doesn't have the reps, you're going to want to get him off of his spot and make him really read the defense. And thus far, to your point, it looks like that's been a pretty bad strategy. We talked about Tennessee has had a pretty sound defense. Their numbers have actually been pretty good, kind of outside of this game and the things that you can measure individually from their defenders. But I mean, look at the 4th and 6 play, right? Where it's like, you need to make this exact throw and you make it. You don't have a lot of options in that play, but this is what it says. So that being said, Kane Womack has been one of these blitzing D coordinators who has, exactly to your point, created game records to where things are easier. So whenever the Bama defenses look great, it's because guys are holding up in one-on-one coverage and the blitz is getting home. Well, Mike Bobo, got to give him credit. That's a game plan right there, that you're swinging the ball, you're getting outside, you're getting the ball in your playmaker's hands against the blitz. So I think it's a really key to look at in this game, whereas Kane's going to want to get home and Mike Bobo is going to want to swing the ball out wide in response to that.
Georgia's got to also figure out, the quick passing game is going to be there, because I think Georgia knows the right side of its offensive line has not been particularly good this year, really struggled in that Tennessee game, and they need to figure out that part of it, because obviously you don't want guys, like, even though Alabama's searching for those game records, you don't want those guys just in Gunnar Stockton's face all the time. Like, that, you can be good against pressure, you can be good against the blitz. That's still an area of weakness that you would like to have your quarterback avoid, is taking as many shots like that. But it is going to be a really interesting chess match between Bobo and between Kane Womack, and who's able to ultimately prevail. I think there will be a lot of moments in this game in which it feels like both coordinators are getting cooked. You're like, what are they doing? They're getting picked apart here, they're getting picked apart there. I expect this to be a back and forth game. I really do. Like, I think we get several lead changes in it. I think there was a part of me that wanted to pick Bama to win a game like this on the road, because it's not that their only road wins have been against bad teams, because obviously last year Alabama went into LSU and won a game that LSU would have been desperate to win, and Bama was clearly the better team. A very different Alabama team this is, but I
another
do think
funny Kalen DeBoer stat where it's like, that's Brian Kelly's only home night loss. It's like, at the time, it would have made all the sense in the world for them to win that game. They got blown out. It's very stark with Kalen DeBoer, I will say.
Yeah, I will say, like, whichever quarterback comes out as the winner in this game, Ty Simpson or Gunnar Stockton, might be an interesting thing if you're betting on the Heisman, to just float a little bit of action on both of those guys. I realize their odds have since improved after quiet starts, but whoever comes out of this game victorious, like, the quarterback will be saying, like, wow, they've arrived. We said that about Gunnar Stockton after the Tennessee game in a lot of different ways, and I even think if he loses in this game, it's not going to be like, oh, see, he's not going to be up to the challenge of being QB1 for Kirby Smart. But I do think whatever quarterback wins this game will be saying, like, dang, they really looked the part. What a big time atmosphere to be able to show up in, and we'll have a lot of very nice things to say about them.
Yeah, and I think about being like a household name too, getting talked about with the Stephen A's on the get ups and stuff like that. Georgia, Alabama has that level of rivalry where, unfortunately, Tennessee, Georgia kind of does it at this point. Bama has been that team, Georgia has been that team. These are multiple national champions. So yeah, I think this is the proving ground that Kirby Smart has struggled with. And I think that this year, you got to like your guys, you got to like that you have a little bit more history. And if not now, win. We keep saying it, but eventually they got to win this one.
I love how that's the ultimate barometer of whether or not you become a household name, is if Stephen A can rattle off who you are on First Take.
It's sad, but it's true, man. He's got like a Kimmel take and everything now. It's so unfortunate everything has been commodified, but the ball knowers know about Tennessee and they know about Josh Heupel, but kind of the more national guys where your Heisman buzz comes from in the narrative, yeah.
This is true.